So we'll go ahead and get ready and warm up and get started. Thank you so much for joining us. This is part 2, Emotional Intelligence, People Skills for Challenging Times. This is the second of 2 webinars presented by consultants from Psychological Associates. That's me, David Rowan, and my partner.
Hi, I'm Michelle Western. I'm also a consultant with Psychological Associates.
Hey, Michelle, good to see your face and your smile.
Yeah, it's nice to see you since we don't get to see each other in the office anymore. So hopefully that will change soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who attended the first session, welcome back. For those of you who watched the recorded version, also welcome back in a way. For those who missed the first, for part 1, we encourage you to watch it at your convenience. You can find a link to it on our website. Additionally, we encourage you to communicate with us and each other through the chat feature during the webinar. And of course, you can always ask questions in the Q&A. And it looks like we've got folks signing in. And as folks are signing in, if you could please just check into the chat. And last time, it was great to see folks signing in from all over the country. We had people from the East Coast, the West Coast, the North, the South, and everywhere in between. So when you have a moment as you sign in, just let us know where you're from. We love to see where folks are checking in from. Great. So we see St. Louis, of course. That's where Michelle and I are right now. And again, I'm David Rowan. I'm a psychologist and a consultant at Psychological Associates.
And as you're sharing in the chat, just make sure that you're sending your messages to all panelists and attendees so that everybody else who's here can see your comments as well, and we can have a little bit of a conversation here.
That's great. That's great. So, this is wonderful. We're seeing folks from Cape Girardeau in Missouri, Memphis, Tennessee, Toronto, Virginia Beach, Virginia, Charleston, South Carolina, North Carolina. That's wonderful. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Well, let's go ahead, and as folks are chiming in and logging in, we want to make sure you don't feel like you're missing anything, but we want to go ahead and get started too. Today, we'll refresh your memories and get everyone on the same page with a quick review of the model of emotional intelligence we shared with you last time. So if you missed the last one, don't worry, we'll get you caught up. Next, we're going to focus on the external emotional intelligence skills. Last time we focused on the internal skills. What we'll do is we'll go through some social awareness and some relationship management skills using a do's and don'ts. And we'll look forward to hearing your do's and don'ts for each of these skills as well. We're going to share some things that we've come up with to help people build their emotional intelligence. And no doubt you're already coming to the table with a lot of skills and strengths. So we want to make sure we do highlight those.
So before we dive into our content, Dave and I are just kind of curious to see, how many of you were able to join us for that first emotional intelligence webinar, to just kind of get an idea of who we've got here. So we've got a couple of quick poll questions for you. Did you simply join us for that first one, or were you able to watch it later? And then also, if you were able to take a look at it, have you been practicing any of those skills that we talked about? The self-reflection, the balanced thinking, maybe both of them, maybe none of them. So we're interested to see what you guys have to say.
I can say for myself, Michelle, that I continue to practice the skill of self-reflection. For folks who signed in last time, I wasn't kidding. I've still got my 2 journals, my physical health self-reflection journal and my emotional intelligence self-reflection journal. And I continue that practice. And I've continued to work on balanced thinking. There are times for all of us during this unprecedented situation that our thoughts can go to extremes. So I've been trying to recalibrate and stay balanced.
All right, so it looks like most of, just a little, almost 3/4 of the people with us were able to join us for that first one. And then nice to see that a lot of people have been using some of those skills. A lot of people have found opportunities to use both of them, some, one or the other. And, there are some honest souls out there that just maybe haven't had the opportunity to put some of those into practice yet. So we appreciate your feedback and helping to make this experience a little bit more interactive. So.
You bet. Well, let's jump into the model.
All right. So just as a bit of a recap for those of you who were with us, and a real quick introduction for those of you who were not, we're using this model of emotional intelligence, which was developed by Goleman. And this is a pretty well-respected, well-accepted model of what are the components of emotional intelligence. And I personally appreciate this model because it's got some nice symmetry to it, which I really like. So on the one side, what we talked about last time, we talked about the self-awareness piece, the do you know what's going on with your own emotions? Can you identify them? There was some interesting research that was done that suggested only about 36% of participants were actually able to name the emotions that they were experiencing as they were experiencing them. And so this moment of, kind of pausing to think through what is it that I'm feeling right now can be really helpful in being able to then kind of move into the next piece, which is the self-management piece. And that's okay, you've got these emotions. What are you going to do with them? How are you going to move forward through the emotions? And so we talked about, as David was indicating with his, he keeps a couple of journals to practice the self-awareness, the self-reflection. And then under self-management, we talked about balanced thinking. And that was the idea of, not catastrophizing, not automatically going to sort of one extreme, but at the same time, not going to the other extreme and feeling like, maybe there's nothing significant going on. And so kind of helping yourself to stay balanced in your thoughts. And so what we're going to cover today on the other side of the model is the external side. This is the social awareness piece. And so last time we talked about, can you identify your own emotions? This is looking at, can you identify emotions in others? Can you understand what other people are feeling? And then after we talk about specifically empathy in regards to social awareness, we're going to move on to the relationship management part, which is helping other people move through their emotions and having a positive impact on them. And with that, we're specifically going to focus on teamwork.
Great. And I did see in the chat a person had a question about balanced thinking, and I think, Michelle, you might have answered it. So that's great. Keep your questions and comments coming. Mm-hmm. So social awareness means being empathetic. And I like to think of empathy as feeling with, not feeling for. So when you're empathetic, you're not trying to feel the other person's feelings for them. You are using your own experience to understand and relate to theirs, and in a way kind of sit next to them as they go through their experience. And you can see that self-awareness that we covered in part one, and Michelle was just mentioning in the model, helps us with empathy. The more we have insight about ourselves, the more we're able to connect with and understand the experience of others. And just as self-awareness is a necessary and foundational skill for the internal emotional intelligence skills, social awareness is a necessary external skill. Think about a great teacher you've had and how they approach the class. It's not one size fits all. The most effective teachers attend to each person, each student, and then they provide what each student needs to keep them engaged and support their growth. For that very active student, they challenge them more and bring them back into the classroom. For that student whose mind maybe is drifting, they call on them and ask them a question and rope them back in. Effective teachers are also aware that some students may prefer a more formal interaction, while others thrive on informality. And I'm sure you can all think of teachers you've had in your life who did exactly that. They were able to empathize with the student's experience and kind of shift their style to meet each student where they were at. They didn't try to learn for the student. The student had to do their own learning, but they were there with the student along the way. Now, while there are a lot of variations and individual differences, there's also some clear do's and don'ts when it comes to empathy. Let's start with our first don't. Don't assume you understand.
So if we're telling you what not to do, so obviously we're also going to share what to do. So instead of assuming that you understand the situation, the first thing that we're going to recommend is to take a beat and ask some questions, because you may not fully understand what that person is going through. You may not fully understand their situation. And so before you jump to conclusions, just simply ask the questions. Tell me more about this situation. Tell me more about what is it you're experiencing. Those are great questions for if you are face to face or camera to camera, as so many of us are these days. But also, if you're maybe conversing with somebody over email, you can also use this to prompt yourself to ask yourself the question: if I were to have this person explain the situation to me, how would they describe it? And that just gets you out of your own thought patterns, your own understanding of what's going on, and really forces you to kind of put yourself in the other person's shoes.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Michelle. And to kind of think a little bit more about that, don't assume you understand. I'm sure we've all found ourselves in that moment with a colleague or a coworker where they were explaining something to us about their experience. And we want to show them that we care. And so we may jump in with a quick comment. Oh, Michelle, I totally understand where you're coming from. Boy, my morning's been super busy too. But stop and think about that for a moment. If I jump in too quickly to empathize with Michelle and say, yeah, I get it, maybe I've really missed something important. What if just from hearing that Michelle's morning was busy, I thought, oh, yeah, my morning's been busy too. But what if Michelle's really been through something? What if something significant in her world occurred and she's feeling a whole set of complex emotions that go much deeper than just, gosh, I've got a lot of emails to do, or man, I'm kind of behind on a few pieces of work I'm doing. What if something happened in her family? What if something happened that has impacted her more significantly? It might feel, frankly, invalidating if I jump in with a quick, I understand. So it is important to pause and be a little bit more reflective.
You wouldn't know that, David, if you didn't stop and ask.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So that was our first do. What's our next do?
So the next do is to summarize. And this can be a tool that you use in conversations that might feel a little bit awkward at first, a little bit uncomfortable. But the idea here is just to really summarize what you hear the other person saying. And it can be as simple as, so it sounds like you're saying X, or what I'm hearing is Y. And that accomplishes a couple of goals. First, it lets the person know that you're listening. They know that you've actually heard what it is they're saying. The next is that you can check for understanding. So, maybe David has jumped to a couple of conclusions, and if he goes through this process and he asks the questions and he summarizes, you can say, well, it sounds like you're saying X, and I can respond with, well, actually, no, it's more like Y. And we can make sure that we're actually communicating clearly. Another thing that it can do is it gives the person a chance to sort of hear back what it is they're saying. Sometimes that can lend a lot of clarity to just hear somebody else say, this is what you're saying. And there can be some realization that happens with that.
Well said, Michelle. I'm sorry, go right ahead.
And then the third piece is to reflect. And this is similar to the summarizing, but it's more focused on the emotions that you're picking up. And really what this is doing is just saying, wow, David, you sound really frustrated about this project. And that can, again, it can achieve a few different goals. First, it opens the door to acknowledging that there are emotions that are impacting the situation and that you're gonna deal with them. Because the reality is the emotions are there, whether you want to deal with them or not. And in order to move forward, it can be really helpful to just kind of open that door, have the conversation about what that person is feeling, and then together you can move forward with whatever it is that you're trying to work on. And so when you practice these reflection statements, you are giving the person the opportunity to, again, correct you if maybe I feel like I'm picking up some frustration, but that's not exactly what is going on. And so David has the opportunity to clarify. And then it also just gives that opportunity to help somebody get maybe unstuck. Maybe they don't realize that they're feeling frustration in the moment. And so by helping them to name that emotion, again, you can both kind of move forward through whatever's going on.
Yeah, absolutely, Michelle. I'm sorry that I jumped in too quickly.
No worries.
I was just thinking of the reality with the summary statement that it's not maybe a natural part of communication that we do every day, but boy, when someone listens to you carefully and feeds back to you what you've just been mulling over, it can make a light bulb go off for you. It can help you with your own self-reflection process. I mean, how many times do we depend on someone around us to be that sounding board? And then also with reflection, how many times have you named an emotion for another person and it just sort of seems to take a weight off their shoulders? They say, oh, wow, it feels great to know that you see and you get it and you're here with me. I'm not alone in this. So as we are kind of walking through our do's and don'ts, I'd love to see in the chat, are there other empathy don'ts that you would like to share with each other? And are there some other empathy do's that have worked very well for you in your career in the workplace? Well, let's move on to our next empathy don't. The second one is don't offer a quick fix. Now, we're all likely to have had this experience before. When someone tells you about a challenge or a problem they're having, you just have this natural urge to want to be helpful. Of course you do. You want to relieve the pain and the suffering. So you have this urge to fix it for them. And it seems like the right thing to do. we facilitate a lot of workshops and talk to people about coaching. And one of the first issues with folks who are coaching is, gosh, they just want to go in and say, here's the answer. Here's how it works. Here's what you can do that'll just solve your problem right away. But you know what? There are times when that really can feel invalidating for the other person. If they've got a conundrum or a challenge that they've really been trying to sort through, and you come in and just give a quick answer, it may make them feel like, gosh, I don't think the other person's really understood how tough this was for me. So instead, what you want to do is acknowledge the complexity of the challenge. By recognizing that the situation is complex, one thing you're doing when you really think about it is you're assuming the other person has competence, right? You're assuming they've tried some things, they may have already tried what you'd suggested. And so by kind of coming to them and saying, wow, yeah, that sounds like it's really a thorny situation. And it's important to, for you to fix it and you haven't quite found your way through. Gosh, tell me about all the solutions you've tried, those kinds of things. So it really helps them feel like you've got it and you're standing alongside them, not feeling the feelings for them, but feeling with them. And if you've ever had someone do this for you, it feels great. I see in the chat someone saying, yeah, it validates their feelings and it validates their concerns. And it feels better to have someone acknowledge the complexity and acknowledge that maybe you've already been around the block with some of those solutions, and it's going to take something really creative to fix it.
All right, so the next do that we're going to recommend is just be curious. We talked in the last session about understanding what emotions are going on in yourself, and now as you're trying to identify the emotions that are going on with other people, turn up that curiosity, because when you start to ask the questions and start looking for more information, a more well-rounded understanding of what's going on, then you turn up the thinking part of your brain, and you can start to turn down the more emotional part of your brain. And so as you may be reacting to the situation as well, you may be having some emotions regarding whatever's going on, or maybe in reaction to the other person's struggle. By prompting yourself to be curious, you're able to make sure that you're sort of thinking your way through the situation rather than just reacting your way through the situation.
Yeah, Michelle, I think that's a point worth really underlining and emphasizing. I think it's in an effort to be empathetic, we turn on that feeling part of ourselves, which is an important part of empathy. But then we can sometimes get a little stuck there, and we do want to engage our whole selves when we're empathetic at work, and that includes both the feeling and the rational part of our brain. So that's a great piece of advice and something to think about.
All right, and then this last do that we have for don't offer a quick fix is to just lean into the discomfort. Emotions can be uncomfortable, especially dealing with other people's emotions. I know for me, that is not my forte. That is not a space I am especially comfortable being in. But that doesn't mean that it's not still important for me to lean in when, maybe some of my colleagues are struggling. It's kind of the difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy kind of puts that distance between you and says, hey, you over there, that's really unfortunate for you, but you're over there. Empathy leans in and says, I understand. It really kind of sucks that you feel this way. I'm sorry you feel this way, and you're not alone. And so empathy creates that connection, and that's so important when people are struggling. So any other thoughts about that one, David?
By definition, all of these emotions that we're talking about, that we're going through during this unprecedented worldwide crisis, they don't feel good. Discouragement, frustration, anxiety, worry, feeling sad, lonely, being away from people you care about, feeling worried about what's going to happen with your business and your colleagues, good colleagues who you haven't seen in a while and wondering how they're doing. There's a lot of discomfort for all of us right now. And empathy is a way to make a connection. It's a connection, though, that it may not be a connection about joy and enthusiasm and excitement and hey, we won new business and we just got a great sale and aren't we all excited that the team finished the quarter strong. So it is a time, I think, when empathy may not feel great in that moment because you're feeling with, but also remember, you're not feeling for. You don't have to carry the weight of their emotions. You just need to show that someone's out there listening, someone out there has maybe been through something similar, someone out there can tolerate the discomfort. And that's something to really consider. When you're not feeling great, having the encouragement or the idea of, you can tolerate this. It's, I trust that you have solutions. And also it's kind of I trust that you can handle not feeling great. You've got some grit and some determination and some resilience in you. And I see it in you. That's kind of the subtext of that message of, lean into the discomfort. It's we can both handle this, as uncomfortable as it might be. And that's such an important message to that person in that moment. I see in the chat that one person is saying, it's right now it's hard to be to understand other people's experience because body language, other nonverbal cues don't come through quite so easily through a Zoom or a phone call. That's so true. And so I think, yeah, now more than ever, these empathy skills are important. Ask, summarize, reflect, because you can't necessarily pick up on the mood as easily.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts from folks in the chat are welcome. Any other do's and don'ts. But we're going to go ahead and move into the next set of skills. And those are, and even harder through text, says someone. That's so true. Yeah,
Yep.
I'm texting my coworkers now a lot more. And the tone of a text, just like the tone of an email, not easy to read. It's okay to ask that question. Say more. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can, it's so easy to fall into the temptation of reading into and filling in the blanks when you don't have those nonverbals. You try to fill in those blanks of what the tone is, what the subtext is. And that's why it's even more important to make sure you are prompting yourself to ask the questions so that you're not jumping to conclusions. You're not filling in the blanks for other people.
That's a great point. So when we think about wrapping up empathy, it's always necessary to balance care and concern with professionalism. Some of you may have heard of the term compassion fatigue. And as leaders, we may worry that this could happen to us as well. We might want to lean away to protect ourselves. Conversely, we may think, oh, compassion fatigue's never going to happen to me. I've got this. I'm tough and strong, and we may try to be all things to all people all day, every day. It turns out that both of those responses might not quite hit the balance you're looking for. I think the most effective leaders can run a marathon when it comes to emotional intelligence and empathy. They ask themselves the question, how much can I carry for others? How much can I support others without burning out so that I can be there in the long run? And they strike the right balance for themselves. They know themselves well enough to know when they can really lean in with that empathy and to that discomfort and when they need to take a little break and refresh themselves and then get back at it the next day. So be careful not to let your let yourself think that you can do it all. And additionally, don't let your skills become mechanical. Sometimes people see, oh, ask, summarize, reflect, right? I'll just do those skills, but do it in your own way. Find your own genuine approach to let your personality show through.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, empathy is a choice. We choose whether or not we are going to connect with somebody. And, we're using these words like emotion and connect. And I know that for some people that can be a little bit, they may not be as comfortable with that kind of language, and that's fine. Empathy doesn't have to be sort of that touchy-feely, we're all gonna sit together and tell each other our deepest secrets and cry together and all of that. Empathy doesn't have to look like that. Maybe it does, but really at its root, it's about making a choice to connect with that person and really just acknowledge their humanity. I mean, that's really what you're doing.
That's well said. There is something in the chat that I'd like to address now before we move into social awareness and the teamwork skills, and that is, how do you recover from compassion fatigue? What an amazing question. And I'd invite anyone with any ideas to chime in on the chat with your thoughts. One of my thoughts is it goes back to your emotional intelligence skills of self-awareness and self-management. So it starts with just knowing that you're feeling compassion fatigue, that you feel exhausted, overwhelmed, maybe watching your sleep and your eating and watching your mood throughout the day to go, oh gosh, I'm really feeling burned out. And then it goes into the standard building blocks we all know about: diet, exercise, sleep. Also other things, look to the things that build your spirits, build your mood. Remind yourself of your own core values, your key motivating factors. If you go back to our first webinar, there's a number of skills that we talk about to bolster your own sense of capability through self-management. And then also there's some wonderful resources out there about resilience. I know we recently did a webinar on resilience, and I welcome you guys to look that up as well. Yeah, great. Keep on weighing in the chat for how to recover from compassion fatigue, and let's keep going. I love seeing that interaction. Relationship management is the next step in the external emotional intelligence skills. This is where you're putting all of your skills together: self-awareness, self-management, and empathy to show up as your best self for everyone around you. It's just like that skillful teacher addresses individual needs. You know, they also manage an entire classroom at the exact same time. And I have a feeling all of us are particularly thankful for those great teachers out there, both the ones who helped us when we were back in school and the ones who help our kids every day. So as leaders, we're called to gather people together and guide groups through these challenging times. And, you know, I've seen a lot of great ideas out there on LinkedIn, my Facebook feed, and you know, things about relationship management when you're remote, and how to overcome these great challenges. We're going to focus on the teamwork skills for two reasons. First, because research indicates that people are on more and more teams than ever before. A survey back in 2017, now that seems a few years ago now, but showed that 95% of people are on at least 2 teams, 80% are on at least 3 teams, and 65% of people were on a team that had at least 1 geographically distant member. And that was back in 2017, 3 years ago. I can imagine these days we're probably all on even more teams. And of course, now so many of us are dealing with geographically distant and remote relationships. So we really need those teamwork skills now. And second, we all also need our teams to be as effective as possible. It is in the midst of a challenging situation or a crisis where we need to rally and rise above and be our best selves. So we'd like to share a few EI do's and don'ts about teamwork. The first is don't think only about the individual. And now this may seem kind of funny because we were just talking about working with individuals, right? You think, wait a minute, what are these guys doing here? Are they contradicting themselves? Well, I think the key word is only. As a leader and as a member of your team, if you're the formal leader or the informal person who has influence and authority, you're naturally thinking about supporting each individual. But at the same time, we can recognize that groups of people can have a shared culture, a shared mood, and shared struggles. The most effective leaders use their EI skills to understand the dynamics of the team that are separate from and unique from the dynamics of an individual on the team. And then they can address those dynamics at the team level. Our first do then is think about your team as a whole. You know, you've all heard the expression, read the room. You know, what does that mean? Well, it means pay attention. And it actually starts back with our skills that we talked about last time, the self-reflection skill. How do I feel? You know, if you're feeling something about the dynamic of the team, likely others are feeling it too. So you can use that sense of your own awareness of what's going on. Is there tension? Is there stress? Are people disagreeing in a way that's become not just disagreeing about the idea, but having even more emotion about it? Are people low energy? Has the bottom fallen out of our motivation? Are people engaging in side conversations and not focusing on the work that needs to be done? So that self-reflection and that awareness of the experience can help you have insight into what's going on with the team dynamic. Next, look and listen. Look for clues to assess where people are at. Back to ask, summarize, and reflect. It's just effective with the team as it is with an individual.
So our next do is to set the tone. As a leader, it's your responsibility to set that tone. I recently heard a phrase in a podcast I was listening to that they were saying, as as the leader, you're responsible for the emotional thermostat in the room. And I really like that imagery of, you can be in control of, are you gonna raise it? Or are you gonna lower it? What is that gonna look like? And so, you have to be self-aware enough to know, are my emotions or the way that I'm reacting to this situation contributing to the temperature in the room, the emotional temperature in the room, so that you can practice any self-management that you might need to. But then, as David was saying, thinking about your team as a whole, what is it you as the leader need to do in order to help your team move positively through whatever emotions are there in the room? Do you need to maybe pause the meeting and address that tone that you're sensing? Sometimes that's what needs to be done so that you can get it out on the table and people can move positively through it, so that you can continue to get done the work of your organization. And I notice we're saying read the room here. It's so easy to fall into that language, but that might be a physical room, that might be your Zoom room. It's not just limited to that physical in-person, being together.
And when you think about, setting the tone, I think that does go back a little bit to that sense of compassion fatigue. And so you don't want to necessarily think that you have to take, full responsibility for all of the emotions of everyone. I did want to just say, I do see someone has a question in the chat. Or a question in the Q&A. I want to let you know we're going to have time at the end to answer your question. So we'll get to that. And if anyone else has a question they want to put for the Q&A at the end, feel free to put those into the Q&A and we'll have time to respond. So yeah, so set the tone, and then, oh, whoops. Sorry about that. Then you want to spark a virtuous cycle. Whether or not you're the official leader, you can help set a tone that's balanced, focused, realistically optimistic, and hopeful. We've all heard of what a vicious cycle is, when a team gets off track and spins down into discouragement, frustration, complaining, focusing on what's not working, but not really looking to see what could turn the situation around or how to solve the problem. And ultimately that doesn't help anyone. And I'm sure we've all been in a room where that started to happen, and it's tough, right? It's not always easy to help a team recover from that kind of a vicious downward spiral. But you can use your emotional intelligence skills to notice that it's happening and try and spark or spin up a virtuous cycle by reading the room. And as Michelle said, that's maybe a virtual room at this point in time, listening, asking questions, summarizing, using reflections. And then you can use the skill of reframing. We talked a little bit about reframing in the first version, the first part, and I'll just say a little bit more about reframing. Reframing is taking what you're seeing, stating the facts of the case, but then offering a perspective that's a little bit more optimistic and a little bit more hopeful. Hey, this is a real problem that we have. We're not getting our customers what they need fast enough. Our forecasting isn't looking like what we think our leadership wants it to look like, but we think it's realistic. Gosh, what do we do about this? Reframing might be, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to improve our communication with our leadership. It's an opportunity to solve a problem for our customers that's been around for a while. It's an opportunity to reflect on how we go about our problem-solving process. Maybe it's an opportunity for a process check, even. Hey, how are we doing at using all the tools we have? Are we using our creativity? Are we using all of our resources? Are we, leveraging all of our learning and the talents we have in the room? So sparking a virtuous cycle through reframing can get everyone thinking in terms of solutions and not just in terms of problems.
All right, so I think we're gonna move on to our last don't for teamwork. Make sure that we have some time at the end to answer those questions. Mm-hmm. And so the last don't that we want to talk about is don't stop giving feedback. And I think that this is one that happens when people think that they are engaging emotional intelligence, but really it's just a way to avoid. I think that sometimes people think that they're being sympathetic by not giving some difficult feedback or not having a difficult conversation, and uh, that's just not what we're trying to encourage here. Emotional intelligence and having strong emotional intelligence skills doesn't mean walking on eggshells around other people. And when people use the best of intentions to not engage in feedback or difficult conversations, uh, you really have to kind of stop and ask yourself, am I doing it for the other person because I'm really being sensitive to them? Or am I doing it for me because I'm uncomfortable in this situation? I don't know how to navigate their potential negative reaction. And so I'm going to say that it's for their benefit, but really I'm taking this opportunity to kind of lean back and avoid what could be an uncomfortable situation for both of us. So instead of avoiding feedback, David, what are some things that we should do instead?
You know, it's about giving feedback, doing it though in a compassionate way. I'm sure you all have heard the meme that's been going around. It goes like this. We're not working from home, we're at home during a worldwide crisis, trying to get work done. Under these circumstances, it may feel like giving feedback is the last thing you want to do. You don't want to stress someone out in an already stressful time. But we have to remember, we all have a fundamental need to contribute, to do something meaningful with our time, to feel like we're adding value. That actually feels great to know you've done something important during your day. And so, are we really being kind to people if we stop sharing feedback? There's a quote from Brene Brown. You already saw one earlier in our presentation. And I saw someone said they loved the Brene Brown video on empathy. She has a quote that I really like, and it's unclear is unkind. And I don't mean to make light of it, but it's kind of like being thoughtful enough to tell someone when they have spinach in their teeth. I mean, nobody wants to walk around all day with spinach in their teeth and find out at the end of the day that nobody told them. Well, there may be a brief moment of embarrassment. We'd all rather know. So give feedback. Now, right now, do it with a little bit of compassion. Ask them if they're ready to hear the feedback. Then ask them to self-assess first. Next, calibrate your words so they can hear what you have to say. Phrase it in a way that will be palatable. Then check in to see how the feedback landed.
And so our next do is to go ahead and confront those
I'm sorry,
problems.
Michelle. I clicked twice.
You're fine. So to go ahead and confront those problems, it's very similar to what David was just talking about. And this can mean that you have to acknowledge the emotions that are in the room, the emotions that are present as you confront the problems. But it's about helping other people recognize, what emotions they are experiencing so that you can all move forward. Just avoiding the problem, avoiding the issue isn't the compassionate route. And so finally, as we move on to our last one, it's just to hold one another accountable.
Giving feedback and confronting problems doesn't just have to be the responsibility of the leader. And we talked about that virtuous cycle that we want to try and get going on all teams. Now, certainly as a leader, you have a certain amount of responsibility to set the tone for how people give feedback and how we hold each other accountable. So you want to start by modeling. Ask others to hold you accountable. Next, practice it by holding others accountable. And finally, remind everyone why it's so important to continue to be accountable each day. And when you think about it, by modeling the accountability piece, asking people to give you feedback, asking people to remind you of commitments you've made, and asking people to help you keep them. In a way, what you're doing is you're saying, we have a trusting place. We have a kind of an open team spirit where we can say honest things to each other. And we all believe that we're able to hear honest things, right? We're kind of, we can handle our own emotions. We can take a little feedback, and we can give a little feedback, and it's all going to be all right because it's done in an atmosphere of mutual respect, assuming positive intention, and giving each other the benefit of the doubt. So we have to remind each other that we're here to accomplish missions at work, and we can do so and be professionals and kind of tell each other this is the reality of what's going on along the way. Oh, I do see a, oh, I'm sorry, Michelle, you go first.
Oh, I was just going to point out that we have a couple of really great questions here that I wanted to make sure that we get to. And we haven't forgotten about the one that's also in the Q&A, but we do want to address these two now because it is the topic that we're currently on. The first question, David, is giving compassionate feedback any different than providing supportive feedback? How would you respond to that?
Well, I have a feeling that the person's referring to something specific in the literature, a defined process of supportive feedback that may have several specific steps. I'll be totally honest and come clean and say I'm not quite sure if what the author of that might be or what those exact steps might be. So it may be the case that that's exactly what I'm talking about. It may be the case that that author of the supportive feedback method includes a few other items. What I can say is that compassionate feedback starts with, asking the person, are you ready to hear it? And then ask them to assess themselves first, and then gives the feedback in a way that's palatable, and then ask them how they feel and what they're feeling and thinking about the feedback, and if they were able to receive it and what they're going to do with it, how they're going to take action on it. So if that fits with the author that you're thinking of and supportive feedback, then yes, it's the same. and if the author of that article suggests something slightly different, please feel free to tell us in the chat what the other steps of that methodology are.
And then we have another question here of how do you practice this with others who only want positive feedback and are not secure in their own emotions? Again, another great, tough question there.
Yeah. So one thing I think it's important to consider is that people are so variable. I'm pretty complex, and I have good days and I have bad days. I have days when my emotional intelligence skills are on point, and then I have days where I'm just not feeling it, and I can get pretty down and discouraged. My thoughts, aren't my best friends. So whoever this individual who you're thinking of, you might be thinking of, it may be the case that there are moments when it's very hard for them to hear constructive criticism. There may be other moments where they're at a more resilient place and maybe more open to it. And so one thing to consider is timing. Can you find a time to connect with them when they are buoyant, when they are enthusiastic, when they are feeling good because they've just come off a success, done something well, and are feeling confident? Maybe that's the moment to provide some feedback when they're ready for it. Other things you can do is cue their confidence before you give the feedback. Now, this is not a feedback sandwich, by the way. I've heard people describe the feedback sandwich as not so pleasant. There's a certain phraseology that people sometimes use about a feedback sandwich. When you say something nice, then you say what you really mean, then you say something nice again. That's not what we're talking about. What I'm talking about is ask them questions to get them thinking about their competencies, their strengths, and what they do well. Tell me about what's been going great in your job lately. What's a recent success? What's a win? What's a skill you've used? Cue the part of their brain that thinks about resiliency and capability so that they can be ready to attack this next thing with, hey, let's think about how you can take all those skills you've got and apply it to get just a little bit better in this other area. It makes me think of what we call solution-focused coaching, which is something that you all can certainly look up and Google. And solution-focused coaching is acknowledging their strengths and saying, hey, what's a plus one? How could you get plus one better in this area? And it helps people feel better about receiving that constructive critique and helps them get ready to try and make some progress in that area.
So I just
Hopefully,
had a couple of thoughts on that last question. It sounds to me that, if you're interacting with somebody who only wants the positive feedback, there may be some underlying trust issues there. They may not feel like their skills are valued. And so there needs to be a conversation with the individual, maybe in the context of the team or the organization, in terms of why it is they're not comfortable getting feedback. And also around, what is the outcome for them, for the business, if you don't have this feedback conversation? What is the path that you all may be on that is going to happen if they continue to avoid hearing the feedback?
yeah, that's a great point. So as we wrap up the section on relationship management and teamwork, um, I think it's important to remember that we're not always going to do it perfectly. We're not always going to do it just right. But we're going to try and take some of these skills and put them to use. Michelle, I think you got some more thoughts on that?
Yeah, and we talk about these skills in terms of practicing them. And a key part of practice is you get it wrong. You mess up, you figure out what you did wrong, you circle back, you try it again. And practicing emotional intelligence skills it's no different. We can pretty much guarantee you're gonna mess this up. We're all human, we all do. Nobody gets it right all the time. But a key part of emotional intelligence is understanding the impact of when you do get it wrong. And so that causes you to circle back around with that people or with that team to say, hey, I kind of missed that, David, when that you were frustrated. I didn't pick up on that. I didn't acknowledge it. What was frustrating you? How do we move forward through this? And so I also wanted to point out, as we're kind of wrapping up here, that we really have focused on the negative emotions, because I think that tends to be what's on people's minds these days. But emotional intelligence is not only about dealing with negative emotions. It's as much about using emotional intelligence to connect with people in their positive emotions. And so keeping that in mind too, that use these skills to connect with people in their joy and their excitement. Use that to figure out what is it that they find motivating and inspiring in their roles. How can you give them more of that? Because that also is going to help you to become a stronger leader.
We talked a little bit earlier about compassion fatigue and how do you sustain yourself and not fall into it. Well, certainly one way is to remind yourself of exactly what Michelle was just saying. Our teams, all of us are on teams that are doing some amazing things. And, we've transitioned to home. We're still taking care of business. We're still taking care of each other. We're adapting every day to balancing work and life. We're doing pretty darn good in a situation that none of us have been through before. So I like what you're saying there, Michelle. Like, let's celebrate the good and realize that we've got a lot of skills under our belt. Well, let's move into answering some questions and then also asking everyone, if you could, in the chat, what will you do differently moving forward? Are there any of these EI skills you plan on using? And the question here is, would love to hear your thoughts on how you balance empathy and compassion when one person is into touchy-feely emotions and sharing and the other isn't. That's such a great question. Michelle, would you like to speak to that?
So a couple of things come to mind. The first one is to keep in mind, and I'm kind of assuming, I'm assuming some things here, so I'm not going through my ask, summarize, reflect process, but I'm assuming that the person who's asking this question maybe is the one who is less comfortable getting into the emotion, and they're interacting with somebody who is more comfortable. And I would say in that situation, The first thing that, I'm being completely honest, the first thing that I have to remind myself is it's not about me. And so me being comfortable in the conversation isn't the point. It's about reaching out to somebody else where they're at. What do they need from you? And so maybe that does mean that I have to be a little bit more emotional in my language, or share a little bit more than generally I'm comfortable doing. And maybe that's appropriate for this situation, so that you can connect with that person. Because at the end of the day, if I'm the one having that conversation, it's not about me and what I need. The other part of that, though, is to also recognize, especially in the workplace, what are appropriate boundaries. Because you do still have to acknowledge that, you don't want to dismiss the feelings that other people have or the emotions that they're experiencing, but there are certain things that maybe isn't, as appropriate for conversation in the workplace. And so to make sure that you are also maintaining those boundaries. Other thoughts, David?
Michelle, you really said it so well. And of course, between Michelle and I, there's some individual differences. I'm a little bit more outgoing. I'm a little bit more of an extrovert. And I'm also pretty comfortable talking about emotional stuff. So I have to remind myself not to overwhelm other people by going there too fast, or with kind of pursuing questions too intently. I think every team has a culture, and I think it's okay to speak honestly and openly and just name that culture. Name your own comfort areas and name your own areas of discomfort. I certainly can, at the start of being on a team, let people know, hey, I'm a little I'm a little bit of an extrovert, and I'm going to be the one who maybe takes us down a side road with conversation. Stop me. Tell me when I've gone too far, And I think you can also say to someone, hey, let's talk a little bit about how we're talking. And this is getting a little more emotional than I was expecting. And what's the right balance for both of us to strike here in this conversation? And am I the person to meet this need right now, or is someone else a better person to meet that need for you? I think all of those are legitimate ways to talk through how to support people, how to be the right leader in that moment, and how to make sure they are getting their needs met, whatever those needs might be.
Well, and David, especially with your training and background, you are tend to be better with those sort of digging into some of the emotional undertones of a conversation. And I will freely admit that that is not my comfort zone. That is not something that I'm particularly adept at doing. And so, when I'm interacting with somebody, I sometimes have to literally prompt myself to stop and oh yeah, how was your weekend, before I jump into the task, because that is important. But if one of my colleagues is really struggling with something that I just don't feel like I am equipped to deal with, I might just say something to them to the effect of, I recognize that this is something fairly serious and important that you're dealing with. Can I suggest that maybe you go talk to David, because I know that he's really good at digging into this kind of thing. I care about you. I'm not trying to avoid having this conversation, but I might not be the right person for you to be having this conversation with.
Yeah.
And so
that goes back
leveraging
to
your team members and their strengths is important also, but you have to do it in a way that communicates, I don't want to deal with this, so I'm just going to foist you off on somebody else.
Yeah, it's share the load, I think, is the takeaway message, right? Everybody on the team has different strengths, and we need to be able to acknowledge that. I'm aware that we're coming up to 2:00. We all have a million Zoom meetings to go to this afternoon, I'm sure. I want everyone to be able to take a break and stretch their legs. So thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate all the comments in the chat. And so what we're going to do is we're going to send you a follow-up email. If you missed part 1, you can find it on our website. Feel free to circle back and watch. That follow-up email will have links and a handout summarizing what we discussed. We have some other free webinars available on our website. Look for us on LinkedIn, and be well, take care, and go out there and keep doing good work, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.